Hello YouTube, it's Charlie in Westeros here, and this is my video review or thoughts and commentary on the last episode of Season 3 for Game of Thrones, which is entitled Mhysa, and that means mother in Giscari. And this word not only refers to Daenerys as the mother of the dragons and the freed slaves, who of course were the people she freed at the very end of this episode, but it also refers to other occurrences in the episode, like, for example, Cersei's tenderness, as hard as that is to believe, emerging via her unwavering love that she has for, her children in spite of their flaws, even Joffrey. And, of course, the title of the episode also refers to Tyrion being pressured to make a mother out of Sansa, that is, to, impregnate her. Now, before I get into this episode, I just have a few things I want to say. The first is I wanted to give a shout out to a fellow YouTuber named Poppy. She reviews Game of Thrones as well as other TV shows. I really enjoy her commentary, and she always puts so much spunk into her reviews, so do check her out at the following link, and it's also in the toolbar below. Now, the next thing I want to address is, since this is the last episode of Season 3 for Game of Thrones, you might be wondering if I still will be making videos until next year when Season 4 starts. And the answer to that is yes, I will be making videos throughout this year. I still have a lot to share, including, reaction videos from my friends to certain events in the TV show, thoughts on things that occur in the books, updates, and news about the show's filming and other events like cast appearances, for example, at Fan Expo, which will be happening in, I think, end of August in Toronto, and I will be definitely attending and filming some stuff there. And more significantly, I plan to make a video, likely next week, just to talk about what I think we can expect from Season 4 without giving away any big spoilers. So, with all that said, let me get into this review. So, the show opens with where we left off last episode, with the massacre of Robb's army at the Twins. In this scene, we also see the Hound escaping with Arya, who gets a glimpse of Robb Stark's body being paraded around with his direwolf's head stuck on his body. It's all in all a very tragic scene still, but I think it serves as an image to show that this really is the end of Robb Stark, or even the Starks in general as a fighting force in the war of what was once 5 kings and now is reduced to, I guess, 3. So the Lannisters, who have almost absolute control now against Stannis, and Stannis, of course, is still stuck on his island of Dragonstone, and the Ironborn, who have been raiding in the north. So yeah, these are the 3 factions that are left. I do think it is interesting to note that in the middle of Season 2, we witnessed the end of Renly as a claimant to the throne, and the dispersion of his forces, mostly joined the Lannisters' cause, while this season we really saw the end of Robb Stark's forces. So I just wonder if we should expect another of these 3 factions remaining to witness their own downfall next season. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The next scene we see is Tyrion and Sansa walking and talking about how they are both disgraces in their own ways, and they really seem to bond over their alienation, much to Shay's dismay in some way. However, the cutesiness is cut pretty short when, in the following scene, during a meeting of the King's Council, everybody at the King's Council finds out that Robb Stark and his mother have been murdered by Walder Frey. When Joffrey says he wants to give Sansa her brother's head on a plate at his wedding, Tyrion, good guy that he is, starts to threaten him, and Joffrey starts going off completely, but then, amazingly enough, Tywin Lannister just puts his grandson in his place, and just like that, sends him to bed, which was pretty epic, I must say. The scene then goes on, but it's only Tywin and Tyrion at this point, and Tyrion, he's a smart guy, and he basically calls out his father for having orchestrated the slaughter of the Northmen and Robb Stark. So, of course, that's when we find out that it was, in fact, Tywin Lannister behind Walder Frey's, massacre of the Starks. Although we knew that in the last season when Lord Bolton, right before he stabs Robb in the chest. Again, by the end of the scene, we get Tyrion being pressured into impregnating poor Sansa, and Tywin, he states that if it weren't for the fact that he put the best interests of the family above his own personal interests by letting Tyrion live, since he's a Lannister, when he in fact wanted to kill Tyrion when he was born. Tyrion then leaves the room and finds Sansa in tears, and we can only assume that she knows, what has just happened to her brother and her mother. The scene was altogether quite saddening, but I think one of the important parts about it is that it further reaffirms just how Tywin really doesn't seem to care all that much for Tyrion at all, even if he is family. And more importantly, that he's actually capable of pretty much anything, including the slaughter of people at their own wedding. In the next scene, we have the Reeds, Hodor, and Bran camped at the Night Fort, which a long time ago it was the main castle of the Night's Watch. Bran also recounts a story about the Rat Cook, which is basically about a cook who used to live at the castle and who got angry at a visiting king and killed the king's son and fed the king's son to him in a meat pie, basically. As a response to this, Bran says that the gods turned the cook into a giant rat who could then only eat its own babies for all of eternity. The gods, however, did this not because the cook committed murder, but because he killed a guest beneath his roof, which is a crime the gods cannot forgive. I must say I'm very, very glad that Bran told the story, because for my review of last week's episode, I mentioned how important religion was in Westeros, and how this action by Walder Frey was, a huge insult to the gods, and could very well mean he is damning himself in the eyes of the people. Now, personally, I hope this is a sign of things to come for Walder Frey, because after what he did last week, I just can't stand the character, and I wish nothing but the worst for him. Anyway, moving it along, we then get a scene of the aftermath of the Red Wedding when the two traitors, Walder Frey and Roose Bolton, they're just gloating in their betrayal. More significantly is that we finally discover who has been torturing Theon, and it turns out that it is Roose Bolton's bastard son, Ramsay Bolton, Ramsay Snow, I guess, who has Theon in prison, and he's basically the one tormenting him so badly. The scene then shifts to Ramsay eating and insulting Theon. It seems like Theon is indeed now castrated and he's begging to be put out of his misery. We also get Ramsay renaming Theon to Reek, and that this is basically to be his, new identity, and that he's no longer Theon Greyjoy. The scene itself was a bit strange to me, because there's a part where Ramsay was, stroking Theon's face, and although we know Ramsay is a sadist, kind of like Joffrey actually, it made me wonder whether, unlike with Joffrey, it did make me wonder whether or not Ramsay's sadism took on very overt sexual connotations, since there seemed to be hints of, I felt anyway, there's hints of it in this scene in particular. Anyway, moving it along, in the next scene, Sam and Gilly finally make it to the Night Fort, and they happen upon Bran and the Reeds. But almost immediately, Sam recognizes Bran as Jon's brother because of his direwolf being there. Sam wants to bring Bran to safety at Castle Black, but Bran has to go north, of course. Jojen Reed then reveals that he knows the White Walkers are up there, much to Sam's surprise, and I gotta say even to ours, although because Jojen is a Greenseer, I guess it's not that surprising that he would know that they're the White Walkers meandering about in the north. He then goes on to talk about how he seems to think that Bran is part of the key to defeating these White Walkers for some reason, and I wish they'd delve into that a bit more, but we'll have to find out in a few seasons, I guess. The scene continues a bit later when Sam shows the group that he found dragonglass weapons, and that they are used to kill the White Walkers. I believe he gives Mira Reed a dragonglass arrowhead since she is an archer, so I'm hoping that's a sign we'll get to see her in action fighting off some White Walkers in a later season, but of course that remains to be seen. After this, Yara Greyjoy and her father Balon Greyjoy, they receive a letter from Ramsay Snow, and a box with Theon Greyjoy's wiener. Balin is of course disgusted, but Yara, she's upset. She wants to retrieve her brother, and so she basically decides to bring a small army of Ironborn to march on the Dreadfort, which is where Theon is being held prisoner, and that's basically the home, I guess, castle of Lord Bolton. And she wants to retrieve Theon and bring him home from there. And with that said, I think it's fair to say that Yara has won a lot of fans among viewers of the show for just that one reason. So definitely something I'm hoping to get from her next season is to see her whoop some Bolton butt. But again, we'll have to wait and see what happens when she lands in the north. Moving it along again, we then get a scene with Gendry and Sir Davos basically talking. Sir Davos has been liberated, and he is back to being Stannis' Hand of the King. I like the scene because we truly get to know more about Davos' origins, which is basically complete poverty, in that he is indeed from King's Landing as well. But it is also kind of tragic because Davos tells Gendry about how his son died on the Blackwater, which of course we already knew. I think this scene is more significant, however, because it sets up Davos in having a greater interest in liberating Gendry before Melisandre sacrifices him, and creates a bond. And it really creates a bond between these two characters for later on when he does free him. After that, we have a scene of Varys trying to convince and bribe Shae to leave King's Landing because, in his words, she poses a danger for Tyrion, who Varys seems to think is the last good man that can save the kingdom, interestingly enough. In spite of this, she refuses, as she thinks Tyrion is the one who sent him. And also, in spite of her unhappiness with Tyrion, I still got the impression that she is, she's really she's still in love with him, and it's it's really genuine and still endures. Which, for those of you who haven't read the books, I have a few thoughts regarding the TV adaptation of Shae versus her adaptation of the books. So if you are interested in my thoughts on that, follow a link to my video talking about that right here. Although I warn you, there are some spoilers there, so stay away if you are a show viewer only. But just to go back to this specific scene, I thought it interesting that, Varys expresses this idea that Tyrion is the last good man to rule the kingdom within Westeros, which is kind of surprising because I don't think that was Tyrion sending a message to Shae. I think that was genuinely Varys trying to save Shae or protect Shae. But I guess we'll have to really see what takes place with that next season. So no more getting into that. After that dialogue, we find an oddly touching scene actually between Tyrion and Cersei. Now, typically I think of Cersei as a heartless bitch, but this scene was one of those rare moments where I actually cared slightly for her. She made the comment that in spite of everything, Tyrion, she said that Tyrion could help Sansa and make her happy and protect her if he just gives her a child. And then she goes on to talk about her own children, and that they are basically the only things that made her want to live. The scene, it truly shows to me just how, in spite of how evil both Cersei and Joffrey are, and in spite of her seeing just how evil her son is specifically, she still loves him, and that love will never end. As I mentioned, the title of this episode is Mhysa, which means mother, and I think it is also referring to Cersei's relationship with her son. But even more significantly, as will happen in the next scene, between Arya and her mother, Catelyn Stark. Because in the next scene, Arya overhears a conversation of soldiers talking about killing her mother and mocking, the scene where her mother was murdered at the wedding. And right in that instance, Arya does something totally epic, and she basically goes and stabs the hell out of a soldier gloating about killing Catelyn Stark, which I would say is the first, albeit small, sense of gratification the viewers get following that disastrous Red Wedding of the previous episode. I also got the sense that this scene echoes something that Melisandre said to Arya a few episodes ago, actually. She said she saw a lot of deaths, I think, in Arya, or she saw death in her, and she saw a lot of eyes looking back. And I think that means a lot of anger and vengeance. And in a way, I hope this single murder, or the single, killing of that soldier in this episode will be followed by much more of Arya avenging her slain family members. Anyway, moving along, we then have a short scene with basically Jon Snow taking a break from running from the wildlings, and it seems that Ygritte has actually caught up to him. It was a bit of a weird scene because it was basically just Jon imploring Ygritte to let him go home, and though she hesitates a bit, she does strike him twice with her arrows, once in the back, I think, and once in a leg. Meanwhile, back at Castle Black, Sam has brought Gilly to Master Aemon, and is pretty much begging him to let her stay there for a time since the North is no longer safe. And it's pretty much implied that he warns Maester Aemon, that the White Walkers are back. And so with that said, Maester Aemon sends ravens all throughout divided kingdom, to beg for help from every warring faction out there to assist him against the fight against the White Walkers. Later on, Jon does make it to Castle Black, and it seems like he has actually survived the attack on him by Ygritte, but not without quite a few injuries. So I guess we'll have to see how well his recovery goes at the beginning of next season, or sometime next season anyway. In the next scene, it is revealed that Sir Davos has received one of these letters, actually, but we also find out soon after that that King Stannis has also learned of Robb Stark's death at the Red Wedding. In a way, this scene is kind of funny because in a strange way, both Stannis and Tywin Lannister are more or less directly claiming responsibility for killing Robb. Yet they are both being reprimanded by their respective advisors, i.e. Sir Davos in the case of Stannis and Tyrion in the case of Tywin, since they both feel that it's really dishonorable to have defeated Robb in such a low manner. And almost in the exact same way, Tywin justifies his blessing for allowing the Red Wedding to happen. Stannis, he justifies his use of magic by pointing to the fact that Aegon Targaryen, the first Targaryen who invaded Westeros, used dragons to beat much larger forces of men. And also, I think there's a reference later on made by Melisandre, and it's also made by Tywin in a previous scene, how they're actually saving more lives by getting rid of this enemy right off the bat. Which kind of makes sense, but considering we've grown to like that character so much, it makes the viewer feel super, super uneasy. With that said, he as in Stannis decides that Gendry must be sacrificed. Luckily enough, though, Sir Davos does save Gendry by sending him off on a boat. Later on, Stannis and Melisandre reprimand Davos, with Melisandre even asking, how many thousands have you doomed? Like I said, you may think you've saved one life, but you're doing more because, you're letting this war continue. Stannis is also about to have Sir Davos executed, but then Davos hands Stannis the letter with the news of the White Walkers. And this truly seems to strike Melisandre, who is now convinced they have to go north and face that threat instead of the Lannisters or whoever else that's wanting to fight them in the Seven Kingdoms. She also makes the comment that the War of the Five Kings is basically child's play against this new and true threat from the north. Ironically, she decides that Stannis will need Davos in the struggle to come, and I also think she is right to decide that the White Walkers are the greatest threat in Westeros. Something tells me that this is a strong indication of the true bad guys in the series, interestingly enough. Anyway, we also get a quick scene where Jaime is back in King's Landing and is finally reunited with his sister. It was a very short but strange scene since it sets up the idea that Jaime has changed a lot physically. According to that one of the locals' reactions to him, he called him a country boy. And even when Cersei sees Jaime for the first time, it's really hard to gauge her reaction. Because in one sense, I felt she seemed very surprised to see him and almost maybe happy, but I also read that she was also disturbed by the sight of him in a weird way. Well, maybe it wasn't such a weird way, but she was, I felt, disturbed by his appearance and, of course, his missing hand. I wish the season finale had given us a bit more to go off from the scene, but sadly it gave us just that really short look between Cersei and Jaime, so we're going to have to wait and see how their bond or their connection changes or continues or whatever next season. I also wonder how Jaime, having bonded with Brienne so much, will affect his relationship with his sister and, of course, lover at this point. But again, I guess we'll only find out next season. And now for the final scene of the season. And before I talk about this, let me get my Team Targaryen scarf. I wouldn't be complete talking about Daenerys without this on. There we go. So now for my final thoughts on this final scene. Daenerys and her troops are stationed outside of Yunkai, and they're awaiting the arrival of the slaves whom her army has just freed, basically. When the slaves finally exit the city, she basically makes a big speech about how they do not owe their freedom to her because it belongs to them by right. And that kind of reminded me of, the Charter of Human Rights, Just saying, it kind of made me feel a connection to 21st century humanistic thought, I guess. I don't know. The slaves then begin to yell out Mhysa, which means, as I said in the beginning of this video, it means mother in Giscari, which is the ancient language of the region. The scene then ends on a semi-epic note where Daenerys goes to the people and she lets herself be carried around as they all kind of focus their arms right towards her, and as her dragons fly around the scene and epic music plays, Season 3 basically comes to an end. Now for my thoughts on the episode as a whole. I will say that it was a fairly bittersweet episode overall, and it actually reminded me somewhat of the end of Season 1, after, how Ned is executed tragically, but the last scene goes to Daenerys with her newly born dragons, except in this case it's the episode after his son and wife are murdered, and Daenerys is basking in a group of loving followers surrounding her, and she's of course surrounded by her dragons flying above. Now, I will be honest and say that I was expecting a bit more from the last episode of this season, and I was actually hoping that the show would give us a bit more of a gratification or sense of relief after the Red Wedding than just Arya killing that one soldier who was gloating over Cat Stark's death. Having read the books, I had actually thought they would include certain other epic events, but I guess they're just going to leave that for Season 4, so by all means, if you thought Ned's execution was epic and so was this Red Wedding, then you have a lot coming. That's all I'm going to say. Overall, the episode was sweet, like I said, but I felt they gave us too many open-ended scenes with too much left unsaid, and I'm really thinking about the scene of Jaime and Cersei. And maybe that's good because, it lets the viewer have a lot of questions and wonder as to what's going to happen next, and, excitement for the next season. But, I don't know, I was just hoping for more. In the end, though, I did like the last scene of the episode, even though it wasn't as supernatural or magical as I was hoping for. I will be making another video in a week or so to give, my thoughts and discuss what I think we can expect for next season of Game of Thrones without, of course, I won't be giving away any major spoilers. Also, like I said, you can expect many, 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 many more videos coming from me throughout the summer and the year, so don't think I am done with Game of Thrones for a year. Just because we have to wait until next April or in March, I guess, until the next season starts again. So please do stay tuned because I will still be updating my channel. Anyway, that's all for now, I guess, and I will see you guys sooner than later. Bye.